In this video, I'm going to reveal exactly why your debt matters more than anything else when you're getting a mortgage. And more importantly, why it is the reason why so many people have such an easy time buying a home, and while others have to wait months, if not years, before they can even get approved. Now, it's not just about having as little debt as possible. In fact, having no credit at all is actually worse than having bad credit. Over the years, I've worked with clients who have a ton of debt, who had basically no debt, and pretty much everything in between. And what I've come to realize is that it doesn't matter so much how much debt you have, but rather how well you've managed it. So first, what actually counts as debt when you're applying for a mortgage? Well, if you start thinking about your debts, you might think about your auto loan, a couple of credit cards, student loans if you got them. Pretty much anything that shows up on your credit report is what counts as a debt when you're applying for a home loan. So that means anything that doesn't show up on a credit report doesn't exactly hurt you, right? Well, sort of. Things like your Netflix, Amazon Prime, your X subscription, or Twitter rather, all of those things don't count against your debts. However, things like child support or past due taxes, those bigger monthly obligations that wouldn't show up on a credit report, all of those things still count. But here's where most people actually get it wrong. It's not exactly about how much debt you have. In fact, we don't care if you've got $50,000 racked up on your credit cards. The only thing that matters to a mortgage lender is what that minimum monthly payment is. So even if you pay $500 a month towards your credit cards, if your minimum payment's only $50 a month, that's what we're going to use. Well, what about things like student loans where I'm not making any payments right now? If there's no monthly payment, or let's say a $0 payment showing up on the credit report for things like your student loans, we'll typically take a 0.5% of whatever the outstanding balance is and use that as the monthly payment. So for example, if you had $10,000 in student loans, 0.5% of that is $50 a month. Okay, but why exactly does the monthly payment matter more than the total actual amount of debt that you have? Well, that's because when you're getting a home loan, what matters more to us isn't necessarily how much debt you have, but your ability to repay it. But not just that, we also want to make sure that you have money left over after paying your debts to afford life. You see, before 2008, it didn't really matter much of what kind of debts you had. All that mattered is, do you make more than what your monthly mortgage payment is going to be? But because that caused so many people to lose their homes, now mortgage lenders use a more conservative ratio between how much debt you have monthly versus how much monthly income you actually have. And so all of this just boils down to one number: your debt to income, or DTI for short. A really simple way of looking at this is by taking those minimum monthly payments and dividing it by your gross or pre-tax monthly income. Now, when you're applying for a home loan, your debt to income actually comes in two different flavors. You've got your housing DTI as well as your total DTI. The housing debt to income just takes into account the mortgage payment plus the monthly homeowner's insurance, property taxes, HOA, mortgage insurance, things like that. So let's say, for example, you had a total housing expense of $3,000 a month, but you made $10,000 a month pre-tax. Your housing debt to income would be 30%. However, you've also got your total debt to income. This includes things that we talked about before, right? Your auto loans, credit cards, things like that. So if you had another $1,000 a month in debt, that means your total debt to income in this case would be 40%. So when you're getting a mortgage, your DTI looks something like this: 30% housing / 40% total debt to income. Now, depending on the kind of loan program that you're planning on using, there's different limits for how high each one of these numbers could be. Now, I've got other videos explaining exactly what the debt to income ratios are for those individual programs, so you can check those out later. But really, as a lender, ideally we want you between 45 to 50% total debt to income. So why does this number matter so much? Well, unless you're a commissioned employee, there really isn't much more that you can do to increase that bottom line number, which is your monthly income. However, you can lower that top number by knocking out some of those debts, therefore lowering your overall or total debt to income. So for example, if you as a household are making $10,000 a month, using a debt to income of 50%, that means your total expenses can be no more than $5,000 a month. And if you had a $800 a month car payment, that means your mortgage can be no more than $4,200 a month. And the more and more debt that you stack on top of that, the lower your purchasing power gets. And ultimately, this is the reason why debt causes so many people to end up having to wait so long to buy a home. Simply because it could take so long to pay off things like auto loans that it could really set you back on your timeline before you're able to get approved for the home that you would want. So how much debt should you ideally have then? Well, of course, ideally the number would be 0, right? That would maximize your purchasing power. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that you should have no credit at all. Your overall credit score and credit profile and mix should still matter. Having a few small credit cards here and there with a very small balance and minimum payments don't matter all that much in the grand scheme of things. And this is because your debts show your ability to make payments in full and on time. and some history is better than none at all. Now, if you do have some or even a lot of debt, don't worry, this is not the end of the world. There are actually still some steps that you can start taking right now that can help you maximize your purchasing power while still minimizing the amount of money that you pay out of pocket to do so. If you're early in the process and still have time to pay things off, here's a good rule of thumb. Every $60 a month in debt that you can knock off your credit report or pay off is about $10,000 in purchasing power. Now, this is huge because one of the biggest mistakes I see most first-time homebuyers make is financing a car a few months or even a year before they plan on buying a home. So for example, a $600 a month car payment, which doesn't seem like much in this economy, can actually impact your purchasing power by as much as $100,000. So ultimately, that's the difference between buying your dream home or settling for a fixer-upper, or worse even, not being able to buy a home at all. So one of the things I like to tell my clients is prioritizing those smaller cards first. It's a great way to start building momentum. They call it the snowball method. And the more you knock off some of those smaller cards, you can get a little bit more bang for your buck. Also, a great tip is to pay attention to your balances versus the monthly payments. It might be tempting to try to knock off the biggest balance that you have because you think that's the highest payment. But if you pay attention, because of some of the different interest rates that you might have on some of those credit cards or loans, some of the smaller balances might have a higher interest rate and therefore a higher payment. So if you have the choice, pay off the smaller balance that's got the higher payment because of course you're going to get more bang for your buck that way. Now, it's important to remember, even though you're paying these things off, do not close any of these accounts. It might surprise you, but closing a credit card actually deletes all of that great history that you've spent so much time building. Now, want to know a little secret? You don't actually have to pay off your debts before you buy a home or even before you get pre-approved for a home. In fact, you can wait all the way up till the day before you get your keys to pay them off. So here's how it works. If you have the cash already to pay off some of these debts, in addition to your down payment and closing costs, your lender can actually mark them as paid at closing instead of you having to pay them off in advance. I really prefer this method because it means you don't really have to wait to do anything, really. You can start shopping for homes right now as long as you're disciplined enough to not touch that money that's meant to pay off those debts and also, of course, not rack up any additional debts in the process. Now, debt to income is a great measure of affordability, but that doesn't mean it's the perfect measure either. My biggest gripe with debt to income is that it uses pre-tax income to get you qualified. It also doesn't take into account any of the other pre-tax deductions that you might have, for example, like health insurance. So in states like California, where I'm from, your post-tax income is going to look a lot different than your pre-tax income simply because of how much is coming out for not just federal, but state taxes as well. And this is where a lot of first-time home buyers make a huge mistake because their lender will say, hey, you're approved and you can afford this payment. And you think in your head, well, they're a lender. They know what they're talking about. I can definitely afford that. But remember, what you can afford and what you're approved for are two very different things. Your approval is only based on DTI, which is based on pre-tax income. It doesn't take into account what you actually take home. So one of the biggest tips I can give you is make sure that you're setting a realistic budget based on your take-home income, not your pre-tax income. At the end of the day, you are the only one who can tell you what you can actually afford because you're the one who's going to be making those payments, not them. Buying a home, especially getting pre-approved for one, can really seem daunting. But understanding how you get approved and how much you can actually reasonably afford definitely makes the process a lot easier. It can help you set realistic goals for what you need to be doing in order to prepare to buy a home, as well as set realistic guidelines so you know how long it's actually going to take. Now, that being said, none of the things that we've talked about today actually matter until you take the proactive step of getting pre-approved. Now, if you are ready to start that home buying journey today, you can book a one-on-one call with me and my team, and we'll help you start building a plan that fits not just your budget, but your timeline as well. But if you're not quite ready, that's okay too. Lucky for you, I've created this video that actually walks you through the pre-approval process step by step and gives you some of the best tips that I've learned over the years to make sure that that process is a breeze. So once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in this video next.